pro-Russian separatists, and Ukraine must adhere to an immediate ceasefire. Evidence must not be tampered with. Investigators need to access the crash site, and the solemn task of returning those who were lost on board the plane to their loved ones needs to go forward immediately.
That was President Obama just moments ago issuing harsh words for Russia as it denies any role in the downing of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 Thursday. Welcome to Lunch Break. I'm Lee Hawkins in for Tanya Rivero. Russian President Vladimir Putin is standing by his stance that it was Ukraine's fault and called for an objective investigation into the disaster. The U.S. now believes that the separatists were responsible for firing the missile. And here to discuss the latest developments is the Wall Street Journal's Moscow bureau chief, Greg White, who happens to be here in New York today. Welcome to you, Greg.
Great to be here.
For those who haven't been following the situation, the 3-month conflict in Russia, first of all, can you give us some background on the pro-Russian rebels who are occupying several towns there?
Right. There have been a number of groups of pro-Russian forces pushing for independence of regions of eastern Ukraine that border with Russia, and since the new government came to power in Kiev in February, they've been fighting an on and off battle against Ukrainian forces controlling various areas of the eastern regions. The West and the government in Kiev argue that they get their support and much of their manpower from Russia. The Kremlin denies that, but many of the leaders of the separatist movement are in fact Russian citizens, and they don't hide that at all. There had been an effort in June at a ceasefire, but it fell apart after the separatists failed to adhere to it. And Kiev in the last few weeks has renewed military actions pushing to try to retake the territory held by the separatists. Mm-hmm. The big weakness for Kiev is that the sections of the border with Russia are still out of their control. As a result, there's an open flow of men and material across it.
Mr. Putin calling for an objective investigation of the disaster, but the U.S. probe has reported these early findings, and as the president said, a missile was fired from a Russian-made SA-11 system, according to our investigation in America. There are early findings, but if that's the case, how is Mr. Putin going to defend Russia against criticism that their weapons and their training enabled these separatists to do what they did?
It certainly puts Putin in a tough spot if it's actually demonstrated that this is good, that this was a Russian weapon and came from Russia. The complexity in the region is that all of the weaponry originally is from the Soviet Union, and the older weapons, there are some of them on the territory of Ukraine that belong to Ukraine but are Soviet and were made originally in the territory of what's now Russia, but during the Soviet period. So they could argue, and I think the separatists have argued, that this particular missile system was something they may have captured when they took over a Ukrainian base. That's meant a lot of skepticism from experts in the West as well as in Kiev. But it may be that it'll be very difficult to provide conclusive proof of who shot the missile, of exactly where the missile came from, and so the Kremlin, sticks to this line that it wasn't us. And there's an unusual situation now where you have both Putin earlier today called for an immediate ceasefire as well, and has called for an objective investigation. The question is whether the fact that with both Obama and Putin calling for this, whether that's actually going to change the dynamic on the ground, which has not been good for a ceasefire so far.
One thing that really stood out was Putin's comments that if there were peace in Ukraine and hostilities hadn't escalated there, this wouldn't have happened, and that the country over whose territory it occurred should be responsible. But if a country were to step up and take responsibility, what could they do? What would it look like other than an apology?
I think it's probably just an apology in that case, but I can't see how the Ukrainians, if what the Obama said earlier proves to be accurate, that the missile was fired from rebel-controlled territory. It seems hard to imagine that Kiev could be held responsible for that. And I think Kiev's response to Putin's claim is, well, look, we wouldn't have there wouldn't be a war in the east of our country if it weren't for the weapons and fighters you were sending across the border. So it's as much your fault.
Okay, in terms of the people of Russia, what do you expect the tone to be there with regard to how Mr. Putin is responding?
So far, the official media and the official line on this is avoiding the explanation that everybody else seems to be focusing on, which is that it was a missile provided by the Russians to the separatists that shot down this plane. There have been all sorts of extravagant offerings from the official media in Russia, ranging from the Ukrainians trying to target President Putin's plane, which supposedly was flying somewhere in the neighborhood on his trip back from Brazil, although that doesn't seem to be the case. In Russia, it doesn't seem like there's a great deal of pressure on Putin at the moment because of this.
Okay, Greg Wright, all over the story. Thank you very much.
Great.
Good to see you again.
Glad to be here.